Turkey is gearing up to elect a new president and parliament in less than 2 weeks. CivilNet will be running a new segment in the run-up to the vote and perhaps after to break down this historic vote to our watchers. To do this, I'm joined by Rober Koptaş, historian and the editor-in-chief of Aras, an Istanbul-based publishing house. So the interviews will be available in Armenian and English, and we will aim to break down this vote and understand what it means for Armenia. So Mr. Koptaş, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for having me, Emilio.
So to start off, we will be looking at domestic Turkish politics. We will be looking at the prospective foreign policy of a future Erdogan government, a future CHP-led coalition government. But we are also going to be looking at all of this through the Armenian angle. And to start with that, where do Armenians stand on these elections? How are the Armenians in Turkey perceiving this vote? Do they have perhaps a preferred candidate?
Thanks again, Emilio. As come to your question, like in other parts of the world, like in Armenia or in diaspora, Armenians are not a homogeneous entity in Turkey as well. As a shrunken, depopulated community, we have different political views, different tendencies, which is of course natural and I think very good. Therefore, there are Armenians who sympathize with the government or the opposition. However, there is a new phenomena. In recent years, we have seen that the institutional structure of the community, its official representatives like the Patriarchate and the heads of foundations, show their favor towards Erdogan and his party. Of course, as a vulnerable community, the political discourse of Armenians was woven very carefully in the past as well to avoid problems with governments and the states in Turkey. But being so engaged with a political party and a leader is a new thing, I think. It's not possible to explain it with the impositions or pressure of this one-man and one-party regime. Here, the representatives of the community having a choice. And I personally think that this is an extremely wrong attitude. It's not right for established Armenian communities to support the current government so openly when there are so many problems in the country, I think. This is a time when democracy is destroyed with all its institutions and inequality and injustice have reached their peak. Because the Armenian community itself and its members like me and like most of the people are affected by the problems in the country, not only as Armenians, but also as citizens. The pressures, the interventions in the lifestyle, the mismanagement of the economy or some other problems are hurting us too. Yes, there have been some positive changes in the policy towards non-Muslim communities during the Erdogan era. This is a fact, but these were conditions that we have the right to have as citizens. These were not privileges granted by the government; they were our rights. It is of course correct to mention these positive developments, but I see a big problem in doing this by becoming a tool of Erdogan's propaganda, because it also means that Armenian institutions turn a blind eye to the needs of the members of the Armenian community and their problems. I have to add that let's not forget that journalist Hrant Dink was killed during Erdogan's rule, and his real killers could not be brought to justice, like was Sevak Şahin Balıkçı was murdered during this period as well. Hate speech against Armenians continues. No real progress has been made in recognizing the genocide, and Turkey has provided a big support to Azerbaijan in all aspects on the Karabakh issue as well. I think it's a grave political mistake in making statements that mean Erdogan's continuation of power for Armenian Patriarchate or some other representatives. And as a result, I think that the vast majority of Armenian community will vote for the opposition candidates, not the Justice and Development Party and Erdogan. And this increases for me the importance of the institutional mistake that Armenian community are doing.
And I mean, it's turning out to be a very tight contest, no clear front runner. It's also seeming a bit like President Erdogan versus the rest of Turkish politics, secularists, nationalists, the Kurdish party, etc. We will go on to break down many things about this election, but I want to give a rather simple question. How do you assess Erdogan's chances? Do you think he's going to pull the rabbit out of the hat again and win again?
Like he always does, right? Emilio, I can understand that Turkish political arena. It's always been very complex and multi-layered, and it's not easy to understand for an outside observer. In these interviews we had with CivilNet on the way to the elections, we are trying to open up these layers to some extent and find some gray areas with the help of your questions. And first of all, I would like to edit an aspect of your question because even though I know it looks the way from the outside that this election is Erdogan versus all of them, but this is not the reality. This is rather the position that Erdogan wants to show himself. And on the contrary, maybe as you mentioned, the opposition succeeded in bringing together different parts of politics, but Erdogan felt the need to bring together many other parties, primarily ultra-nationalists like Greyvos, Devlet Bahçeli and his party, and representatives of pious religious groups under the name of People's Alliance. From this, we can assume that he is really aware of the risk to lose the election. In this respect, it will be more accurate to evaluate the Turkish elections as an election between those groups who are satisfied with the current one-man regime, of course with different motivations, and against the people and groups who want the democratization of the country and the establishment of democratic principles such as separation of powers, transparency, and let's say accountability. As come to Erdogan's chance in election, this is a very critical election with historical significance, of course. But at least we can say that for the first time, it seems more likely for Erdogan to lose than to win. In many opinion polls, he seems to be behind his rival Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu in the presidential election, although it still appears to be the first party, Justice and Development Party, in the polls in the parliamentary election. It's a fact that they will lose lots of votes compared to the previous elections, and it seems very, very difficult to reach the votes that will provide them majority in the parliament. In this regard, we can say that at the end of his 20-year-old rule, Erdogan no longer has a story to tell, no new promises, and that he cannot present a perspective that will create excitement among the voters. Of course, this doesn't mean that Erdogan will necessarily lose, because although the vote counting process seems relatively reliable in Turkey, it can be said that the election carries very serious risks for the opposition, despite all the hopes, because media is almost completely under control, and the propaganda of Erdogan and his party is carried out through state means. And this is a real problem for the opposition because they cannot reach to a wider audience. And as come to Erdogan's head, I think today it is not containing anything but some militaristic rhetoric, unrealistic boosts, some continuation of the services rendered himself in the past. No new things, but only about exaggerating his successes in Turkish political arena. Doubts exist, of course. Maybe he will hand over the power peacefully if he loses the election. There is a big problem there. And it's not known whether he will attempt to repeat the election if there is a close difference, as you said. He did it in Istanbul municipal elections in 2019, but that time the election was renewed with an arbitrary and illegitimate decision, but his party lost to the opposition candidate by a larger margin in the second election. And I hope that he's learned a lesson there and won't do anything like that. And if it goes on a path that he will not recognize the elections, it means that a very difficult time awaits Turkey and all of us, of course.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a lot of questions left hanging there, but Mr. Koptaş will be joining me again very soon as we attempt to break down the run-up to the vote, the potential second round, and the aftermath. So thank you, Mr. Koptaş.
Thank you, Emilio.
And thank you for joining us on CivilNet.